My son's voice on the phone was cold, the way you'd speak to a stranger whose rent was past due. My daughter-in-law's laughter drifted from somewhere in the background, airy, sweet, and utterly indifferent. When the call ended, the word "Mom" felt like a title they had silently revoked long ago. I used to think a family broke apart with arguments, with slammed doors and flying plates, with tears and rage. Instead, it shatters with courtesy. In the sentence, "Don't worry, Mom, we're just trying to help you," delivered in the calm, level voice of a wealth manager, a tone that implied, "You are no longer competent enough to manage your own life." I am 62 years old. I was a biologist with a PhD, working in genetic research. My entire life was tied to test tubes, to patients, to overnight shifts. I lost my husband at 49. He died of heart failure during a business trip. 3 weeks after the funeral, I was back in the lab because bank statements don't offer condolences. I raised 2 children, Logan and Lily, with my own 2 hands, with sleepless nights, with every penny I scraped together. Tuition money, birthday money, money to make up for missed hugs and dinners I couldn't come home for. Money was my language of love. Security was my way of saying, "I will never let life defeat you." And yet, that day on the phone, Logan spoke as if he were delivering a verdict. "Mom, you should be grateful we even answer your calls." The words themselves didn't sound cruel at first, just weary, frustrated, a line that had probably been rehearsed. His wife, Lena, chuckled, not at me, but at the image of me in her mind, an old woman who didn't know when to let go, when to rest. I could almost hear her rolling her eyes through the phone. "Grateful?" I asked. "For what, Logan?" "For everything we're doing for you." His voice tightened, constricting like a seatbelt. "We're managing your accounts, making sure the bills are on autopay. You don't have to worry about a thing anymore. Except for one thing, where my money was going." A long pause stretched between us, the tiny silence where love used to live. "Mom, don't start," Lena cut in, her voice louder now, sharp and sugary. "You asked us for help. You said so yourself, that the numbers confused you." I wanted to remind them that I once ran a multi-million-dollar research lab, that I had managed debt and payroll and the lives of 2 children for decades without a single late payment. But I only said softly, "Right, I must have forgotten." The truth is, I never asked them to help. It happened quietly, like frost creeping onto a window pane on a winter night. It began with sharing account access, just in case of an emergency. Then came the joint credit card, for convenience. Then the power of attorney form that Lena slid under my coffee cup on Christmas morning, her smile as sweet as sugar dissolving in milk. "It just makes things easier to manage, Mom." And I had wanted to believe her, to believe that my own children, my own flesh and blood, would never use the word help as a leash. After that call, I sat motionless at the kitchen table, staring at my phone. The screen lit up, a photo of the 2 of them, Logan with his arm around Lena, both smiling, radiant, distant, and cold. I pressed the block contact button, just to see how it felt. I didn't go through with it, but the very thought brought a strange, startling relief. The house was dead silent, save for the low hum of the refrigerator. It's strange how silence can be so deafening, especially when you realize no one is ever going to walk through that door again. I made tea, my 40-year habit, a heaping spoonful of sugar, though the doctor said to use half. Old habits are the last loyal friends we have left. I kept replaying that word in my head. Grateful, a word so gentle and so cruel, the word people use with patients in the dementia ward. You should be grateful we still come to visit. That day, I understood. Gratitude, when forced, is no longer a kindness. It is obedience wrapped in the guise of morality, and in that moment I knew it was time for me to stop calling and start moving everything back to where it belonged. They came on a sunny afternoon. The light streamed through the window, glinting off the teacup I had just poured. Logan smiled. Lena stood beside him, holding a thick file folder, pale blue. We just need you to sign a few little things. Estate tax stuff, the accountant advised it, Lena said, her voice as light as if she were discussing curtains. I looked down at the first page. Bold letters. Power of attorney. I didn't ask questions. I trusted them. I was used to trusting people with the last name Moore. Just paperwork, Mom. It'll make things easier. I nodded. I didn't want to ruin the rare afternoon my son had agreed to spend at my table. Logan pulled out a chair, uncapped a pen, and placed it neatly in front of me. The pen was heavy, cold, with a familiar metallic scent. I signed my name, once, then twice. The ink was still wet. Lena smiled, a kind smile, tinged with a little pity. I smiled back. No one said anything more. They said I would always be in control. I nodded, watching them gather the file. Inside my head, there was only the sound of the waves outside. Slow, steady, sad. When the door closed, I touched the warm spot on the table where the paper had been. A faint smear of ink remained. I thought to myself, sometimes people don't take your assets with a knife, but with a smile. I don't know when they left, only that the sun had set and the house was quiet again. The pen was still there, the ink drying, but my name was on that paper, along with a void I hadn't yet recognized. I cleared the table, washed the cups, and stood by the window for a long time. The ocean was still blue, its normality a cruelty. I took a deep breath and whispered to myself, "It's just paperwork, right?" 3 weeks later, I received a thick envelope from the bank. I never let anyone manage my mail, but this time, the words printed in the corner stopped me cold. Account access change. Co-manager, Logan Moore. I sat at the kitchen table, opening the envelope with my late husband's old letter opener. Inside were 3 pages and an explanation as cold as a utility bill. All expenditures will be monitored by the co-owner. I didn't remember authorizing that, but it seemed someone had already helped me. That evening, while I was watering the orchids on the veranda, Leonard, my elderly retired neighbor who used to be the CEO of a financial firm, walked over. He joked, "Lydia, your mansion looks fantastic online. That photographer is a real pro." I turned, momentarily confused. I didn't hire a photographer. Leonard raised an eyebrow, surprised. Then he showed me his phone. On the screen was a Zillow listing, clear as day. Oceanfront estate, 8.5 M, pending. A picture of the very house I was standing in, with the orchid garden I had just watered. My house was for sale. I stood there, listening to the waves, to my heart beating as slow as an old clock. In my mind, only one word, pending. A small word, but big enough to make me understand that everything had begun to slip away. I didn't call Logan right away. No screaming, no accusations. I just sat down in the wicker chair on the veranda, opened my phone, and looked at the text message again. "We'll handle everything." And I realized, when someone says everything, they're never just talking about responsibility. They're talking about control. That night, I opened my laptop. The screen reflected my face in the dim light, a mixture of resolve and fear. I searched for the company name Logan had once mentioned, LM Holdings LLC. The website was bare bones, with only a virtual address and a hollow logo. There was nothing there, except a contact email, registered on the same day I signed the power of attorney. I replayed every glance, every smile, every piece of paper from that day. The small, harmless details, now assembled into a complete picture. The picture of betrayal, wearing the mask of concern. The next morning, I went out to the beach early. The air was cold, the fog thick. I looked at my house from a distance, the white walls, the wooden frames, each pane of glass reflecting the face of a woman who had once been so trusting. I understood then, when love becomes power, it will find a legal way to bind you. I poured a cup of tea, placed the bank letter beside it, and wrote a small note in my journal. Starting today, every small sign is evidence. I didn't know how I would fight this, but I knew that anyone who underestimated the memory of a 62-year-old woman would soon learn that people who have lived by precision never forget. I waited until the sun hung low, when the sea was just a glimmer of silver. It was the time I always used to call Logan. The time he used to say, "Mom, I'm busy. I'll call you back." But tonight, I was the one dialing. The call connected on the first ring. Logan's voice was placid, cold as an answering machine. "Mom, is something wrong?" I took a breath, hearing the waves crash behind me. "Why is my house listed for sale on Zillow, Logan?" The silence on the other end was so long I thought we'd lost the connection. Then his voice came back, strained, suppressing irritation. "It's just a refinancing, Mom. A smart investment strategy. You wouldn't understand. You should just let us handle everything." Lena cut in, her voice so smooth it was chilling. "You should be grateful, really, Lydia. Not everyone has children willing to help manage their assets." That sentence, sweet as syrup, but cold as a needle. I said nothing, not a single word of defense. I just listened to my own breath filling the silence. Logan sighed. "Mom, the more you worry, the more mistakes you'll make. I'll send you the financial report later. You just need to rest, okay?" Rest. The word drilled into my head like a tiny bit. They didn't say trust us or don't worry. They said rest, which meant don't interfere. I replied softly, "Okay, I understand." My voice was so light, even I was surprised by its calm. When the call ended, the screen went dark. It reflected my face in the shadows, a face that was neither angry nor sad. Only the eyes looking out at the sea as if seeing something very far away but drawing inevitably closer. I stood up and put the phone on the table. In the quiet kitchen, the refrigerator hummed like a countdown clock. I poured a glass of water, sat down, and wrote a short line in my notebook. March 22nd. They told me I should be grateful. I looked up, out the window where the moonlight touched the ocean's surface, and for the first time in months, silence didn't feel like loneliness. It felt like an ally. Because in a world where people take from you with tenderness, silence is the first weapon. I didn't call back. I didn't argue. No emails, no questions, no explanations. 3 weeks passed. The house remained peaceful, as if nothing had ever happened. Every morning I made tea, opened the windows, and watched the sea. The water was still blue, the waves still steady. Only my trust had changed color. Logan and Lena thought I had accepted it. They mistook my silence for fatigue, but the truth was, I was listening. Not to them, but to the cracks in their plan. I began to document everything. Every call, every email, every mention of power of attorney. I saved all my bank statements, took photos of strange transactions with my old phone. Every slip of paper, every line of text, I folded carefully and placed in a separate file in my husband's old wooden cabinet. I wasn't as tech-savvy as they claimed, but I knew how to observe. And sometimes, observation is the only power you need. That night, as I was taking notes, a thought passed through my mind like a cold draft. They didn't just want the assets. They wanted the power of decision, and my silence was their test. I smiled to myself. If they needed a weak person to defeat, then I would let them believe they had found one. I bought a new journal with a dark brown cover. On the first page, I wrote with my husband's old Parker pen, "Do not fight with anger. Win with patience." I began to watch them through small signs. Lena would call around noon to ask if I'd eaten, but her tone was only interested in my pension account. Logan sent an email warning me not to do anything with the house until the paperwork is finalized. Every word, every phrase, I saved. They didn't know I still had old friends in the legal field, and they certainly didn't know I had already started sending the first set of copies to a trusted address. One afternoon, I sat by the window, the wind blowing through the white curtains, and I wrote in my journal, "They believe I'm losing my mind. Good, let them." I closed the journal, listening to the steady crash of waves against the cliff face. In the roar of the sea, I could hear my own heart more clearly, slow, calm, beat by beat. They say revenge is a dish best served cold. I don't believe in revenge, but I believe in justice. And justice only comes to those who are patient enough to wait for it. I looked down at the table, where the Parker pen lay silent. The late afternoon light caught its silver body, cold and gleaming. I whispered, as if to myself, "Let them believe I am weak, because sometimes patience is the quietest fire, but it burns the longest." That morning, I drove to the Santa Barbara County Administration Building. The sky was a hazy gray, the fog thick, and the coastal road was strangely empty. I carried a small handbag. Inside was a slip of paper with a note in a slightly trembling hand. "Property deed. Verify ownership." The young clerk greeted me with a polite smile, the kind people give the elderly when they assume they're just doing some harmless paperwork. I presented my request, my voice calm. "I'd like a copy of my property deed." She typed a few keys. The sound was soft, like rain on the desk. A moment later, the printer whirred and stopped. She bent down and retrieved the page, a simple sheet filled with cold, hard text. I looked down and read the first line. Clear as day. Lydia Moore and Logan Moore. Joint tenancy with right of survivorship. I read it again and again, each word etching itself into my mind. If I died, the entire property would automatically transfer to Logan. No court, no probate. All it would take was for me to cease to exist. I held the paper in my hand. The ink was still warm. Outside, the light filtered through the glass door, splitting my face in two, one part trust, one part awakening. That evening, Leonard stopped by. He brought a bottle of red wine and an orange tart, as he always did. I placed the deed on the table and pushed it toward him. He read it, then let out a low chuckle, his voice gravelly with age. "They've prepared your funeral on paper." I looked up at him, a smile so thin it was almost invisible. "Then I'll be the one holding the pen." We sat in the kitchen of my small castle, the sea breeze slipping through the door, making the white curtains tremble. Leonard poured the wine, its red light reflecting in my eyes like a rising flame. I carefully folded the paper, put it in my leather portfolio, and placed it in my husband's wooden cabinet, the same cabinet where I kept his love letters, our children's birth certificates, and our faded wedding photo. Now I added another piece of evidence, proof that my love had been exploited in the name of help. When Leonard left, I stood at the door, watching his figure disappear into the fog. My own words echoed in my head. If they want to rewrite my life with paper, then I will rewrite it with law. I turned off the lights, leaving only the moonlight flooding in from the window. The cabinet door closed with a soft click, like a promise being made. I touched the cold wood and whispered to myself, "Now it's my turn to hold the pen." The small cafe was tucked away on a corner of State Street, the same place Linda and I used to meet 20 years ago. Back then, I was in a white lab coat, and she was holding a stack of files as thick as a wall. Now, all we had were 2 cappuccinos and a comfortable silence. "You still like extra cinnamon," she said, her eyes glancing at my slightly shaking hand. "The hands are old," I replied, "but the mind remembers." I took the file out of my bag. The cover was old, the edges frayed. Linda read a few lines, then looked up, her gaze as heavy as metal. "Power of attorney, and this, joint tenancy with right of survivorship." I nodded. She spoke slowly, enunciating every word like a forensic expert delivering a finding. "If you pass away, that house automatically goes to Logan. No court, no will." I stirred my coffee, listening to the spoon clink against the porcelain. A small sound, but it landed in the deepest part of my soul. "I'll just have to live long enough to fix it," I said. She let out a soft laugh, not of pity, but of someone who has weathered storms and knows the wind will rise again. "You need 3 things," she said, scribbling on a napkin. "First, a revocation of power of attorney. Second, a quitclaim deed to get Logan's name off the title. Third, a new account, independent, anonymous, structured as a trust." I looked at those 3 lines, and it felt like 3 arteries slowly regaining blood flow. "What do you want to name the trust?" I paused. The sunlight slid across the table, falling on my cup. "Whitestone," I said. "My husband's name. He believed that integrity was the foundation of everything." Linda nodded. A beautiful name. And a strong one. She placed her hand over mine. We're going to do this quietly. No noise. We won't let them know. I smiled, a breath of a smile. They're used to thinking I'm weak. I'll let them think it a little longer. Leaving the cafe, I walked slowly down the sidewalk. The September air smelled of salt and burnt coffee. In my pocket, the folded napkin felt like a map, Linda's handwriting a set of directions. That afternoon, for the first time in years, I felt like I was coming back, not as a betrayed mother, but as myself, the woman who built a life on precision and persistence. I went home, opened the cabinet, and took out the Parker pen. On a fresh sheet of paper, I wrote 3 words in capital letters, Whitestone Foundation, and beneath them, in a small script, a line for myself. If they want to control me with paper, I will become free with paper. I haven't celebrated my birthday in years. In fact, I can't remember the last time anyone wished me one, but this year, Logan said he was coming. Both of them, he and Lena. They brought a cake, white roses, and a well-rehearsed smile. "Happy birthday, Mom," Lena said, her voice sweeter than the frosting. I invited them to sit, too. On the table was the tea set my husband had chosen. Exquisite pottery where every crack told a story. Logan spoke first. "Mom, we found you a place," he said, his voice as smooth as a salesman's. "A luxury apartment near us. It has an elevator, cleaning services, no more stairs. You'll be much more comfortable." I smiled faintly. "More comfortable? Or more convenient for you?" Lena tilted her head, her smile unwavering. "So we can take better care of you. You know, you've worked too hard." I looked down at my teacup. The steam rose between the 3 of us, misty and false. On the table they placed another file, this one bound in gray leather. "We just need you to sign a few little things," Logan said, "to finalize the sale of the house. The money will go into your account, so you don't have to worry about a thing." I reached for the pen. Not their pen. It was the Parker, the one Leonard had given me last week, with a tiny camera hidden in its silver barrel. The light in the room glinted off its tip, cold and sharp. "Let me look it over," I said, my voice even, unhurried. I turned each page, reading, as quiet as someone counting their own heartbeats. I could see the impatience in their eyes. Lena leaned forward, feigning patience. "You trust us, don't you, Mom?" I smiled and signed. Once, then twice. The ink bled slightly, my hand trembling, the signature of a woman growing frail, perfect for the role I was playing. Lena let out a sigh of relief. Logan collected the file, his smile blooming as if he'd just won a long game of chess. I stood up to pour more tea, my voice serene. "Will you come see the new apartment with me?" "Of course," Lena replied. I nodded, set the teapot down, and looked her straight in the eye. "Then I look forward to it. Everything is about to change." They didn't catch the meaning in my words. They only heard the same gentle voice as always. When the door closed, I sat down, opened the Parker pen, and saw the small indicator light flash. The recording had begun. I pressed the button to stop it and tucked it into my pocket. In the room, there was only the distant sound of the waves and the scent of cooling tea. I said softly, almost a whisper, "Go ahead and sign, my dears. This time, I'm rewriting the script." That night, Santa Barbara was unnervingly quiet. The sea seemed to hold its breath, only the wind whispering through the pines outside my window. I sat in the law office, the desk lamp casting a cold, straight light onto a blank page. Linda sat across from me, turning each document, her voice slow and clear. "Let's begin." Leonard stood by the door, arms crossed. He said nothing, just gave a slight nod as I signed. Each stroke of the pen was firm, steady. Each signature was a calm heartbeat. There was no rage, no tears, only a chilling clarity. Linda double-checked the papers, typed a few keys. She spoke in a low voice. "Filed. The Whitestone Foundation is now the official owner of all assets." I looked at the text on the screen. My name, no longer beside Logan's, alone, clean. Leonard walked over, placing a hand on my shoulder. "I thought you would be angry, but you seem so peaceful." I smiled. "Anger makes you blind. I needed to see clearly." Linda printed another copy, clipping it into the file. "They won't know. The records were refiled with the Delaware Trust Registry, legal and discreet." I nodded. "Good. That's how silence becomes a weapon." Outside, the waves crashed steadily. In the small room, the printer hummed on. Each page emerged like a soft tap on the past, erasing the marks of years spent in blind trust. When Linda switched off the lamp, only the blue glow from the monitor remained, reflecting off the desk. I looked at the numbers, the words, as if seeing myself being rewritten. No longer the managed mother, but the woman reclaiming her own story. I said softly, my voice like the wind in the waves, "They think I'm erasing my name from this world, but really, I'm just placing it higher." No one replied. Only the distant city lights, twinkling like finished seals on a document, and my heart, as calm as the sea after a storm. 2 weeks later, I was watering my orchids when the phone rang. An unfamiliar number, a man's voice on the other end, nervous, trying to sound professional. "Excuse me, is this Mrs. Lydia Moore?" "This is she. I'm calling from Wells Fargo. There's a small issue with finalizing the sale of the Santa Barbara estate." I wiped my hands on a cloth and sat down in the wicker chair. "What sale would that be?" "We received the paperwork from a Mr. Logan Moore, but the current title is held by the Whitestone Foundation." I smiled. "Oh, is that so?" His voice faltered. "There might be some confusion, as Mr. Moore's filing came in 2 weeks after the title transfer." "I see," I said, my voice as light as a breeze. "No need to worry. Thank you for calling." I hung up. Silence. Then my laughter broke through, quiet, almost a breath. That afternoon, Logan called. His voice was rushed, distorted with anger. "Mom, what is going on? The bank said the house isn't in your name anymore. What is the Whitestone Foundation?" I answered slowly, enunciating each word. "It's a small organization, founded to protect what is mine." Lena interjected, her voice cold. "Where did you move the assets? Do you even know what you're doing?" "Of course," I said. "For the first time in a long time, I know exactly what I'm doing." Silence on their end. I could hear them whispering, fragments of panic. An incredulous, "No way!" escaped from Logan. Then the line went dead. I poured my tea. The late afternoon light caught the cup, the liquid thin and clear against the porcelain. I watched it, feeling an unfamiliar peace. The next morning, Leonard came by with the local paper. The center page headline was bold: $8.5 million coastal property sale halted due to ownership dispute. He set the paper on the table and looked at me. "Have they figured it out yet?" "I imagine they will. Sometimes you only realize you never owned something once it's gone." He chuckled, a soft sound of pride. The room was full of light, but it wasn't harsh, just a normal morning when a mother got her name back. I made more tea, handing him a cup. My son always thought he understood every process. He forgot that I was the one who taught him how to fill out his first tax return. Leonard nodded, smiling faintly. "It seems that lesson is one you're finally using yourself." I looked out at the ocean. The waves rolled in, patient, as if no storm had ever passed. And inside, I felt the same, calm, but not empty. I thought to myself, they thought they had sold the house, but really, I was just beginning to buy back myself. The first text arrived on a Monday morning, a short line from Logan's old business partner. "Call me. It's urgent." I read it and set the phone down. Outside, the sea was flat as a mirror. No wind. The air smelled of salt and of something about to break. At noon, Leonard stopped by with the paper. The headline took up half the page. Elder financial abuse allegations. More Gen CFO under review. The photo was of Logan in a gray suit, a reporter's flash catching the strained calm on his face. I stared at the paper for a long time. No joy, no satisfaction, just the feeling of the wind having finally blown in the right direction. "You see," Leonard said, pouring tea, "sometimes justice only needs a little nudge." I nodded. But the nudge has to be precise. That evening, the phone rang. Logan's name flashed on the screen. I let it ring 3 times before answering. "Mom!" His voice was raw. "Who did this? Who leaked this to the press?" "Leaked what?" I asked, my voice level. "About Morgen, the accounts, the house. They're saying there are signs of fraud. Do you have any idea how this affects me?" "I do," I said, and I waited. On the other end, he was breathing heavily. "Don't be silent like that. This is my job, my reputation, my entire career." "You're right," I cut him off. "And this is my life. The difference is, I lived my life with my own 2 hands. You just signed your name on it." There was the sound of something falling, then silence, then Lena's voice, sharp and quick as a knife. "You've ruined everything. This family, Logan, our future." I smiled, though no one could see it. "No, Lena. I've just taken back my part." They hung up. The dial tone was a repetitive, empty beep. I placed the phone on the table and turned to the window. The tide was coming in, the waves white and powerful, as if to wash the past away. 2 days later, the story exploded. Morgen was under internal investigation. The stock plummeted. Investors were pulling out. The papers all used the same phrase, alleged misuse of elder assets. The small city began to whisper. I went to the market as usual. Acquaintances greeted me, but their gazes lingered a moment too long. Some offered a small smile, others bowed their heads. No one said anything, but I knew they had all read the news. That evening, Linda called. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine," I said. "We didn't leak that story," she said softly. "I know. But someone sent anonymous bank statements to the press." I was quiet for a moment. It could have been Leonard, or it could have been another hand, the hand of truth, which sometimes needs no command. Linda sighed. "Logan will be suspended. The investigation will take months." "Do you feel sorry for him?" "I feel it's fair." I smiled. "That's what I was hoping for, too." That night, I couldn't sleep. The waves crashed hard against the rocks below. The wind whistled under the eaves, making the curtains flutter like a soft breath. I stepped onto the veranda, wrapped in a shawl, and looked into the distance. The city lights were a blurry shimmer, blinking like unfinished thoughts. I remembered Logan's face as a child, bright eyes, his hand clutching my shirt on his first day of school. He used to be afraid I would leave. Now, he was the one who wanted to erase me from the paperwork. Life is sometimes a circle. You return to the same place, but with a different heart. I wasn't angry with him anymore. I didn't need to be. Anger would only make me like them. I chose quiet, the quiet of a person who knows she is right and needs no one to validate it. The next morning, Leonard brought another paper. A photo of Logan, this time on the national business page. The small caption read, "CFO resigns amid scandal." I looked at the picture. His eyes were empty, his hands clenched. Lena was no longer by his side. It was just him, alone, in a sea of reporters. Leonard said, "You won." I shook my head. I didn't win. I just restored fairness. He smiled, nodding. "Fairness is a form of victory." I didn't reply. I poured more tea, the steam rising and vanishing into the air. The scent of jasmine was faint and sad. I thought, perhaps true happiness isn't seeing others pay a price, but when you no longer need to prove anything at all. That afternoon, I received a package. No return address. Inside was a small envelope containing a handwritten note. I only wanted to protect what belonged to our family. Below it was the familiar signature, Logan. The script was shaky, no longer steady. I read it and folded it. No tears, no anger. I just placed it in the wooden cabinet, along with the old deed and the faded family photograph. At sea, the sun was setting slowly. The light painted the edges of the waves red, reflecting on the window panes. I saw my reflection in the glass, not a victor, just someone who had lived long enough to understand that even loss has its own order. I whispered, like a farewell, "My son, some lessons are only learned when everything has fallen apart." The wind blew hard, rattling the door. I stood there for a long time, listening to the sound of the end. Not loud, not tragic, just the sound of the sea, washing away what was no longer needed. That evening the sky was gray as metal. Waves crashed against the cliff below the veranda, each one heavy and rhythmic. I was tending to my orchids when I heard a car stop at the gate. The engine cut, a door slammed. I didn't need to look to know. Logan had arrived. His footsteps were heavy, urgent, crunching on the gravel path as if to crush the silence. The door opened. He stood there, his suit wrinkled, tie loosened, eyes red from lack of sleep. Lena was right behind him, lips pressed into a thin line, clutching her leather handbag like a weapon. "Mom," Logan began, but it wasn't a greeting. "What did you do?" I set down the watering can and turned, my voice calm. "I replanted what you cut down." "Stop speaking in riddles," Lena snapped. "The house, the company, Logan's reputation. It's all ruined because of you." I looked at her, then at my son. His eyes no longer held their arrogance, only fear mixed with wounded pride. I poured tea and invited them to sit. No one moved. The air was as heavy as the wind before a storm. Logan took a step forward, his voice choked. "I've lost everything. Do you understand? Morgen is under investigation. The stock is in free fall. My wife is leaving me. The press is following my every move." He paused, then spoke softer, almost pleading. "I was just trying to protect the family's assets. I just thought you weren't lucid enough to manage them yourself anymore." I laughed. "Really? How lucid does one have to be sold out by her own son?" Lena stepped forward, her voice sharp. "You're trying to play the victim, but you weren't perfect either. You controlled everything, Logan, the money, every decision in this house. You made him feel like he was never good enough." I looked at her for a long moment. She trembled slightly under my gaze, but held her defiant facade. "I taught him responsibility. I didn't realize he would learn appropriation so much faster." Logan threw a newspaper onto the table. "The whole world thinks I'm a thief who stole from his own mother. I'm being crucified on television. Do you know how humiliating that is?" "You only reap what you sow," I said slowly. "Shame isn't when people lie about you, it's when they finally tell the truth." The silence that followed was so long I could hear the clock ticking. The waves crashed harder, the wind howled at the window, making the curtain billow and fall like a sigh. I walked to the table and pulled a large envelope from the drawer. I placed it in front of Logan. Inside were copies of all the documents, the deeds, the transfers, the bank records. Each page was stamped in red, neat, and perfect. "If you really want to understand, read this." He picked it up, his hands shaking. His eyes scanned the lines, the words, then they stopped at the end. "Owner, Whitestone Foundation, Lydia Moore, founder." I said softly, "That is how I protected what was rightfully mine. With law and reason, not with tears." Lena turned away without a word. Logan looked at me, his eyes red-rimmed, his voice hoarse. "I just thought you needed help." "You were mistaken," I replied. "I just needed to be respected." The words landed, heavier than the first clap of thunder offshore. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the sea. I used to think silence was weakness, but sometimes silence is the best plan. I turned back, my gaze no longer cold, but resolute. "You lost everything because you saw kindness as a weakness, and now you will learn the price of contempt." Logan didn't answer. He just stood there, his shoulders shaking. The room smelled of rain. Lena looked at him, then walked out the door, her high heels clicking a final, sharp rhythm on the wooden floor. When the door closed, it was just my son and me. No more waves, no more wind, just the breathing of two people who were once a family. Logan said, his voice broken, "I was wrong, but I don't know how to fix it." I walked closer and placed a hand on his shoulder. "One day you will understand. Justice isn't revenge. It's the act of returning everything to its rightful place." He hung his head, his shoulders heavy as stone. I said nothing more. No comfort, no blame. Oh, because some mistakes can only be healed by time and emptiness. I turned away and poured more tea. The steam rose, thin as a memory. When I looked again, Logan was gone. The door was ajar. The envelope was still on the table, open, the wind flipping its pages as if rereading the story. I took a sip of tea and closed my eyes. My voice was a low, soft murmur, just for myself. You finally came, not to apologize, but to learn how to lose, gracefully. Outside, the rain began to fall. Slowly, steadily, the way the world keeps moving, even when a heart has been broken. The news broke on a Wednesday morning. On the financial report, Logan's name appeared next to a red banner. Moore Holdings CFO resigns amid fraud investigation. I sat in front of the TV, my teacup growing cold in my hand. The anchor's voice was steady, emotionless. Each word, resign, fraud, investigation, was like a slow, deliberate cut. There were no tearful images. Just a video of Logan leaving the glass tower in Palo Alto, shirt wrinkled, no tie, his face turned down to avoid the cameras. Lena was not beside him. They said she had left town 3 days earlier. I turned off the TV. The room fell silent again, leaving only the ticking clock and the distant waves. It was strange. I felt no satisfaction. Nor did I feel sad. Just a feeling of the wind having passed through, sweeping away years of dust. That afternoon, Leonard brought over the print edition. He set it on the table and said only one thing. Sometimes justice doesn't need to be summoned. I nodded, and it often arrives when people have stopped waiting for it. That night, I received a handwritten letter. No return address, just a few shaky lines, the ink smudged as if written in a hurry. I only wanted to protect what belonged to us, but I forgot that you were part of that us, too. I read the last line, just a short signature. Logan. I folded it. I didn't throw it away. I just placed it in the drawer next to the transfer documents and an old photo, the two of us on his graduation day. We were both smiling. Neither of us knew that smile would be the last honest thing we shared. The next day I went to the beach early. The sun wasn't fully up. On the sand, a few broken shells glittered in the misty light. I brought a small fern with me, the only thing Logan ever gave me back in college. He had said, "This plant doesn't need much care. It knows how to survive on its own." I placed the pot on the edge of the veranda where the wind and sun met. Looking at it, I thought of Logan, of how people want to control everything, money, reputation, even those they love, without realizing that the things that last the longest are always the things that know how to let go. Leonard came out onto his porch, holding 2 cups of coffee. "I saw your light on last night." "Couldn't sleep," I replied. "Do you think he'll ever come back?" I was quiet for a moment, then said softly, "I think everyone has to come back, at least in their own heart." He set my coffee down, his eyes kind but deep. "You know, Lydia, a lot of people win with noise. You won with silence." I smiled, not denying it. Because noise is easily forgotten, silence remains. At noon, Linda called. Her voice was light, as if she'd just exhaled after a long journey. "Moore Holdings has frozen all of Logan's accounts. He's under formal investigation. No one can touch your assets anymore, Lydia." "I know," I said. "Thank you. Are you okay?" "I am. I just feel sad, that things could have been different." Linda sighed. "But if things had been different, you might not have found yourself again." When the call ended, I looked through the window. The sunlight hit the glass, illuminating the framed document on the wall. Whitestone Foundation for Scientific Education. The words shone, a confirmation that everything was returning to its proper order. In the evening, I opened the window, letting the sea breeze fill the house. The papers on my desk stirred. Among the files was Logan's letter, not yet put away. I looked at it for a long time, then whispered to myself, "You tried to hold everything in your hands, and in doing so, you let it all slip away." The wind turned a page. The ink was dry, but the words were still heavy. I folded it gently and placed it under the fern. Then I sat down and finished my cold tea. The tide outside rose and fell. The world went on. It didn't need anyone to keep it running. Just like me. After all these years, finally learning to let things live on their own terms, I said quietly, my voice low and calm, "What collapsed wasn't the assets. It was the illusion that we can control everything forever." The last of the sun slanted through the window, touching my face, warm and peaceful. There was no victory, no defeat, just a woman, learning to live gently with the truth. 3 months later. The sun returned to Santa Barbara, a gentle sun, not harsh, as if the sea itself had learned to breathe slower after the storm season. I woke early, made tea, and stepped onto the veranda. The sea orchids were blooming again, their petals as thin as glass, translucent in the light. In the corner of the garden, the small fern Logan once gave me was still green, its new fronds curled like they were listening. The Whitestone Foundation officially opened this week, not in a big city, but right here, in the coastal mansion that was once a battlefield of trust. Now it's a small center for marine biology students. I wanted this place to be a new beginning for young people who never had a chance. Linda was the first to arrive. She brought the new wooden sign, smiling. "You should see it. The carving is beautiful." And I wiped my hands and looked down at the engraved letters, Whitestone Foundation for Scientific Education. I nodded slowly. It's not an empire, just a white stone, small but bright enough to not get lost. Linda looked at me, her eyes soft. "You know, Lydia, you didn't just win. You taught them a lesson they will never forget." I smiled. "No, I didn't teach them. I just reminded them." At noon, Leonard arrived. He brought 2 bags of soil and a few seedlings. "You said you wanted to start a garden out back. I brought lavender and sea daisies. They suit the climate here." I knelt down, my hands in the soft, damp earth. "Thank you, Leonard. I think, after everything, the earth is the only thing that's truly honest." We planted in silence, the sound of the spade, the wind, and the faint fragrance of new blossoms. Nothing more needed to be said. We both knew that silence is sometimes the fullest language of peace. When he left, I stood looking at the garden. The newly tilled rows were straight and clean. The sunlight touched each sprout, reflecting like memories being rewritten. Slowly, but surely. The afternoon faded. The sea turned a pearly gray as gulls soared across the horizon. I sat in my old wicker chair, watching the waves and remembering the past few months. The pain, the betrayal, the collapse, and the rebirth. I realized that justice isn't about making others fall. Justice is when you no longer need to hold a grudge, when the truth stands on its own, needing no hand to hold it up. My phone buzzed with a message from Linda. She sent a photo, the Foundation's first group of students smiling under the new sign. I looked closely. On their faces, there was no fear, only belief. The simple belief that if a 62-year-old woman could start over, so could they. I set the phone down and poured more tea. On the table, the sun reflected off the water, creating a shimmering band of light, like an invisible thread connecting the generations. I said softly, "In the end, what remains isn't the assets, but how we use them to do what is right." As the sun set, Leonard returned with 2 glasses of red wine. "Have you thought about writing a memoir?" he asked. I shook my head. "I already have. Not with words, but with a life. He clinked his glass against mine, his smile gentle. The evening light was golden as honey. In that moment, everything went still. The anger, the fear, even the old wounds, they dissolved like salt in water. I walked down to the garden, placed my hand on the fern, and whispered, "You once said it knows how to survive on its own. I think finally I've learned that too." The wind blew softly, the fern leaves trembled as if in reply. I looked out at the sea, the waves still coming and going, with no regret, no resentment, just the eternal rhythm of continuation. As night fell, I turned on the porch light. Its glow cast shadows on the new garden, a garden of peace, a garden of new beginnings. My voice was a quiet whisper, just for myself to hear. They say revenge is an ending, but really, forgiveness is how you start a different story. I sat down, my hands wrapped around the warm teacup, and looked out at the sea, where the darkness and the water became one. No more arguments, no more fear, just my breath and my heart, as still as the sleeping garden. This morning, a fog settled over Santa Barbara, a thin, light mist, as if the sky were learning to breathe. I woke early, my old habit, made a pot of tea, and opened the window. The air no longer smelled of dampness, only of salt and lavender. The mail carrier had left a small package at the gate. No note, just a handwritten scrawl. For Mom. I bent down and opened it. Inside was a tiny fern, and a piece of paper folded so tightly I knew the writer had hesitated for a long time. "You gave me one of these when I was 19. I said it survived because it didn't need anyone. Now I'm sending one back to you, because I think the most resilient thing isn't the plant, but the person who grows it. I'm trying to start over. I hope you've still left the door open." Unsigned, but I knew that handwriting. The slight slant, a little clumsy, just like when he was a boy. I placed the pot next to my husband's photograph. The morning light streamed through the glass, hitting the water in my teacup. Dust motes danced in the sunbeam, glittering like things left unsaid. I sat at my writing desk. The old Parker pen was still there. The ink was dry, but it wrote smoothly. I opened my journal to the last page. I didn't write much, just one line. He said I should be grateful they still answered my calls, so I stopped calling and started listening to myself again. I put the pen down, listening to the steady rhythm of the offshore waves, a beat of silence, a beat of sound, just like life, which, whether quiet or loud, has its own cadence. At noon, Linda stopped by. She brought some foundation papers that needed signing. I signed each one, my script even and slow. When I finished, she asked, "Are you really going to rest now?" I smiled. Not rest, just live differently. We sat on the veranda with our tea. She looked around the garden. "This house is so peaceful. I almost forget it was once the eye of the storm." I looked out at the sea, the sun reflecting on the water, soft as silk. Every storm leaves behind nothing but the smell of rain and cleaner air. Late in the afternoon, Leonard brought over some lavender, saying the new season was coming. I arranged it in a glass vase on the table. The fragrance filled the room, a scent of forgiveness, of time that has moved far enough for wounds to heal. On the wall, the old photograph still hung, me, my husband, and 2 children in the garden, years ago. I looked at it for a long time. The feeling of loss was gone, replaced by gratitude, for what was, and for knowing, now, how to hold it with peace, not with a clenched fist. As the sun sank below the horizon, I turned off the lights, leaving just the small lamp on the veranda. Outside, the waves still crashed, the sound of the sea and wind blending together, steady, like the heartbeat of the world. I stood up, opened my journal, and added a small line below the last. Freedom isn't about being alone, it's about finally being whole. I translated it in my head, then smiled. Tu du humphila omot ming. I closed the journal and placed it beside the fern. Outside, the sea and sky were the same shade of blue-gray. I took a deep breath, letting the salt, the flowers, and a hint of memory rush in. Then I whispered, just loud enough for the wind to hear, "Thank you for letting me learn how to live again."